Good morning and welcome to Chapter a Day. We're reading from Home Again and we're currently on Chapter 20. Garrett's been in here every day this week. Twice on Tuesday when he came in for a reading with Zephyr, Mary said, eyeing her sister who was studiously examining the stamped sterling pendants she'd just finished arranging in the front case for the 10th time. You know, Mary paused, waiting for a reaction from Poppy. He bought one of every tarot deck we have in stock. He also ordered several more online that Zephyr recommended. He says it's helping him with his research, whatever that means. He had me doing a clarifying reading for him on Tuesday, Zephyr shouted from the back. Apparently she'd been listening too. Nothing was sacred and there was no privacy or family respect inside Mary Hanson's shop. Now and then was a Hanson sibling confessional, only with more pushing and prodding and less praying for absolution. Since none of them were raised Catholic, the shop served as their hub of sin-telling, their unique version of sibling therapy, and good old-fashioned gossip sharing. That, plus fomenting trouble in the form of instigating would-be romance when the stars lined up. All that was needed was a wee bit of stirring the pot to set future lovers on a path to get there. They were all hopeless romantics, the lot of them. Even Astrid wasn't immune to wanting her mother to find someone who'd love her forever. And no member of the Hanson household, including by adoption and extension Robert Oakley, was above doing whatever it took to make one of their own happy, even if it hurt. Poppy's head came up after she readjusted the last of the sterling pendants. Her tone said she was mildly interested. The intensity in her eyes gave truth to the lie. What exactly is a clarifying reading? Zephyr came out of her changing room in the back, curtained off by a deep purple velvet curtain. She hadn't changed yet. In her regular incarnation, Zephyr wore little makeup, kept her sandy-colored hair short. She wore jeans and plain t-shirts, generally with Converse sneakers, the low ones, not the high tops, most often black, sometimes white, depending on her mood. Zephyr's nod to eccentricity in her wardrobe was her tendency to wear outlandishly patterned socks, most with risque sayings emblazoned on them. Poppy loved her. She also envied Zephyr's unflappable disposition and her uncanny way of sussing out liars, cheats, and scoundrels. Zephyr was the kind of woman who didn't worry about her place in the world. She simply occupied it and appeared to thrive no matter what circumstances she found herself in. Adaptability and the ability to see things as they were Zephyr's superpowers. Zephyr pulled out the chair opposite the one she used for readings and motioned Poppy to sit. Poppy gave up all pretense of trying to more artfully display the sterling pendants she'd helped Mary pick out for the front case. Something about the pendants called to Poppy, and she'd been right about their appeal. The sterling sealing wax signet type pendants sold like hotcakes. Poppy came over and sat in Zephyr's reading chair. Then she asked again, "What's a clarifying reading?" Zephyr tilted her head as she looked at Poppy quizzically, as if she were trying to explain something complex to a 5-year-old, only to realize that what she thought was complex wasn't complex at all. Garrett's been asking me to interpret the cards he pulled for himself after he does his own interpretation. Zephyr's gaze didn't waver. I think he's double-checking. He's got a good eye, he's intuitive, and he's thoughtful. He also ordered every book Zephyr suggested he read on the tarot, Mary said as she went about dusting her displays. Mary was not a fan of dust or disorder. Zephyr told him to check the used bookstore in town, which he'd apparently already done. I told him he could get the books faster and for less on Amazon than I could through my vendor. You know what he told me? Poppy knew Mary was going to tell her regardless of whether she showed any interest. The subject was important enough for Mary to stop cleaning and stand with her hands on her hips, still holding an extended Swiffer handle. Poppy asked, I have no idea. What did Garrett tell you? He said, and I quote, Jeff Bezos has enough money. He doesn't need to add mine to his fortune. Okay, Poppy said, not connecting the dots Mary wanted her to connect. Mary rolled her eyes at her and spoke slowly, an affectation from their childhood indicating Poppy wasn't as smart as Mary had given her credit for. Garrett sells more books through Amazon than he does on any other platform, probably all platforms worldwide added together. And? Poppy asked. And Mary drew out the word. And he still cares enough about me and other small shops to order from us. That says something about the man's character. You're reading a lot into a book order, aren't you? Zephyr spoke before Mary could. It wasn't a book Garrett ordered. It was 37 of them. So far, Mary added. Zephyr smiled at her. So far. Poppy didn't know there were that many books on Tarot. Why would anyone want to read 37 books on Tarot? As soon as the words were out of her mouth, Poppy's gaze shot to Zephyr. No offense, she said. Her face flamed, and she looked from Zephyr's amused gaze to Mary's exasperated one. None taken, Zephyr said. Tarot is just one thing worth learning if it interests you, and you approach it as an entry point into your own subconscious. Few people have that kind of interest. Garrett seems to. You don't. No reason to find offense in that. Poppy tried not to be offended by Zephyr's response. There was nothing in it or on its face to be offended by, but she felt like she'd somehow come up lacking. She rebelled against that feeling. She felt it and the subtle, you're not good enough vibe most of her days with Mark. She didn't want to feel it now. She was as in touch with her subconscious as the next person, wasn't she? She certainly was more in touch with her feelings than a man who refused to read years of letters from his father. Poppy's chin shot up, her spine straightened as she pushed her shoulders back. She was a strong, independent woman. It was time to act like one. She could be at least as insightful as Garrett Oakley. The man didn't seem to have any real insight at all. Her posture became more erect as her thoughts snowballed into visions of Garrett not even his father would recognize. The man was a menace, a fraud, a scoundrel of epic proportions who left a perfectly acceptable fiancé on national TV, disregarded the best man Poppy knew for years, and had the audacity to smile at her whenever their paths crossed, which was too damned often. And he managed in the span of a week to endear her daughter and her siblings and that crazy elusive dog not only to like him, but to want to spend time with him. Mary's newfound respect for the man rankled her, as did Zephyr's confidence in his insight. Damn it! This was her family, and her town, and her equilibrium Garrett Oakley was messing with. Before Poppy realized what she was doing, she had Zephyr's oldest tarot deck in her hands. How did it get there? As she gently shuffled the cards, she noticed quite a lot. They felt warm in her hands, comfortable, like old slippers. The room got quiet as Poppy turned inward, concentrating on nothing other than how she was feeling, without judgment or shame, simply letting herself feel the maelstrom of emotion, some past, some present. She allowed herself to release all of it. The simple act of shuffling Zephyr's well-worn, well-loved cards brought Poppy comfort. As she handled the cards, Poppy's mind began to flash with images. The first moment she held Astrid, the last time she held her grandmother's hand, Leif holding her and Mary to him as they stood by their father's hospital bed. He had survived the car crash that instantly killed their mother, only to slip away 90 minutes after the surgeon okayed his move from critical care to intensive care. Opening her first college acceptance letter. Her first time dancing on stage as an adult 6 months after her divorce. The fear and euphoria had combined into a heady mix that had her head spinning with new possibilities. Garrett smiling invitingly down at her as their thighs touched during dinner. Pick a card. Poppy's hand stilled as the gentle command reverberated in her head. She set the deck on the table, cut it, and pulled a card. She set it face down on the table in front of her. Turn it over. Poppy's fingers didn't tremble as she reached out and flipped the card. She shied away from readings, not liking the trepidation she felt on most of the few occasions she'd sat in front of Zephyr and allowed her to read. They had always been rather innocuous and not very insightful. Until now. Poppy sensed that whatever card she turned, it would signify something important. She didn't fear it. Fear hadn't been her friend in the past. Rather, she left herself open to it. No matter what she turned, she'd embrace it, overcome it, face it, and, Garrett Oakley, head on. Like a woman of substance whose head and heart didn't do cartwheels just because a man she wanted to taste, smell, and run her hands over happened to be living within whispering distance if they left their windows open at night. The sun. The sun, a card of power and positivity. Her card. The one in Zephyr's favorite deck. It had a brilliantly painted image of an orange and yellow sun, its rays reaching out toward the planets revolving around it. There was also an image of the circular zodiac encompassing some of the planets' orbits, including Earth's. Poppy saw hope in the card she pulled, hope for her future that acknowledged the needs she had for today. She'd let fear rule her for too long. Fear of loss, fear of letting go and enjoying life outside of work and Astrid and her siblings. Fear that she may be duped again if she allowed herself to feel anything for another man. Fear that the pull she felt for Garrett all those years ago, before she lost her parents, before he lost his stepmother and moved away, never truly went away. It was a crush, the kind of first love most teenage girls have for rock icons or much older star quarterbacks from their high school football teams. The kind of infatuation that burns bright and burns out, never to be lit again. Except what Poppy felt for Garrett never burned out completely. Even her disastrous marriage couldn't completely extinguish it. And then he rode back into her life on a motorcycle, full of scruff with danger dancing in his eyes. In fairness, he didn't just ride in. She provoked him. She'd poked the bear and he came running. Yet he didn't pounce. He didn't even raise his voice. He seemed to sense her need to insert herself into his life over Robert's letters, and although he clearly resented it, he hadn't turned beastly about it. He'd been decent about her meddling. She watched him with Robert and Astrid. He was trying. Even if he hadn't read all the letters yet, he was trying. Every time she looked at him, Poppy wanted to hold his hand, to pull him close, to feel his arms around her and his lips on hers. She wanted to touch and taste and feel every inch of it. and she wanted it now. Poppy looked down at the card, her card, and thought, what on earth are you waiting for? You're a big girl. You can handle a little rejection if that's what comes. You can handle having a man naked next to you if Garrett is so inclined. Funny, she didn't want to get naked with anyone else, just Garrett. Poppy ignored the tiny voice that said, what then? She'd worry about after. Now was the time to act. I gotta go, Poppy said, standing up, reluctant to walk away from the table and the card she'd drawn, yet knowing she'd carry that card through her day, her week, her life, in her mind's eye. She'd have no way of knowing just how pivotal those next few weeks would be. What she did know was that she felt stronger, more engaged, more alive than she'd felt since Astrid's birth. She didn't question that or run from it. It felt good and scary, but mostly good, and she needed that. Zephyr gave her an odd look but said nothing as Poppy moved away from the table. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a knowing smile or a smile at Poppy's expense. It was more of a you go girl smile. Warmth and a welcome flash of self-confidence flowed through Poppy. She wanted to explore what she was feeling and thinking. She was not plotting ways to get Garrett alone as she made her way out the door. At least that's what she told herself. Mary said something about dinner and a movie, but Poppy wasn't really listening. She held up a hand, silently acknowledging her sister's tendency to boss her younger sister around, and kept right on walking. Poppy walked all the way through town, managed to make her way through the park next to the Red Robin Inn, and wound up at the marina, directly across from Garrett's house. When she realized where she was, and that she was staring at the structure with the intensity of a cat burglar, Poppy quickly turned on her heel to head back to the inn. Her momentum carried her straight into a pleasantly scented wall of masculine chest. Garrett had been standing next to and slightly behind her, watching her watch his house. Not only had he caught her at it, he seemed amused that she didn't notice him until she ran directly into him. He could have reached out to steady her, but he didn't, leaving Poppy to reach out and steady herself by caressing and assessing the breadth and strength of his chest. He grinned down at her. Keep rubbing, love. It doesn't bother me that we're on the sidewalk. He nodded toward his home. I'd invite you in, but it seems I have an amphibian infestation that hasn't entirely resolved yet. He looked bemused for a second before a slow smile filled his face with satisfaction and an odd kind of confidence. I had a flood before that, and if I'm not missing the mark on the biblical reference, hail and massive storms are next. I don't think even my father can arrange for the weather to act according to his will. His eyes narrowed down at her as if he were spilling some deep truth that she wouldn't be able to figure out. She found that offensive, transparent, and oddly charming. Perhaps that was just his forced nearness was having on her, a fact she acknowledged and resented. Since she hated feeling resentful, Poppy decided not to be. She could take charge of the situation she found herself in and hopefully turn it to her advantage. And then it hit her. Even my father can't arrange the weather. Poppy pushed back from him, eyes narrowed, hands on her hips. Are you telling me Robert caused your flood? That Robert made sure you had to stay in the cottage next to mine? He seemed to be waiting for Poppy to work it all out. Yes, although he had a little help. It didn't take a genius to pick up on Garrett's emphasis of the word little. Robert and Astrid committed criminal trespass and criminal damage to property? Poppy's mind ran wild as the various things Astrid had said over the last week. and the word dastardly playing center stage ran through her mind. She dropped into a squat, covering her ears. She didn't realize she was saying, no, 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 over and over again like a mantra until Garrett put his hands under her armpits and raised her back up. He was smiling warmly, apparently not realizing the sides of her breasts were tingling where he touched her. He said, yes, yes, yes. Your daughter and my father are the criminal dynamic duo. The good news is they'd have committed multiple felonies if I didn't give my consent. Poppy shook her head at him. He was moving too fast for her. His words weren't making sense. Her body was responding to him in a way she was willing to explore instead of shutting down. The latter should have scared her. It didn't. The former made her formulate stupid questions that she didn't like at all but couldn't help. You gave permission to ruin your house? He laughed, confusing her even more. No, of course not. He shrugged. Although I admire their creativity, I don't think my dad came up with the frog infestation on his own. But the flooding thing has his name all over it. He managed to screw up our plumbing more than once when I was growing up, much to my mother's chagrin. Poppy's voice was sharper and louder than it should have been when she demanded, what the hell are you telling me? Spit it out, clearly, right now. She emphasized her command by hitting him, not too hard, but hard enough to let him know she was serious, with the back of her hand to his chest. It made a thudding sound. Garrett immediately captured her hand and held it palm down to his chest. Then he pulled her to him with his other hand. I don't like to be manhandled, Poppy said. Garrett immediately let her go. Poppy felt the loss of the heat of his chest against her palm, even though the temperature was nearing 80. She felt ensnared by his gaze. He wasn't touching her, yet she couldn't look away. She didn't back up, neither did he. She could smell his soap. Clean, piney, nice. I believe you asked me a question. Did I? She asked. Amusement flickered in his eyes. Mm-hmm. He nodded. Then you ordered me to be real clear right now. I didn't say that. Close enough. Poppy said nothing, mainly because that did capture what she'd said, only far more succinctly. She wanted to feel his hand holding hers again. She wasn't sure how to ask for it. Will you kiss me? She asked. I thought I was the one who needed to be clear. Poppy took a step closer to him, raised up on her toes and lifted her hands to the sides of his face. He hadn't shaved. His skin was warm and scratchy and inviting. She didn't pull him down to her. Let me be crystal clear. I've wanted to kiss you since the moment I saw you standing behind your screen door, arms crossed, heat flowing from your eyes as you tried to smite me with a look. He put a finger to her lips. Don't even try to deny it. You don't lie well. I'm guessing it's lack of practice. Understand something, Poppy Hansen. I wanted to kiss you senseless then. That feeling has grown every day I've had to be near you and not touch you. I'm so damn sick of seeing you comb your hair in front of your window, dressed in that sack t-shirt thing you wear, without underwear, and yes, I noticed. Before she dropped her hands from his face, Garrett lifted her off the ground and kissed her. Gently at first. When she wrapped her arms around his neck, he deepened the kiss, wishing they weren't on the sidewalk and that the inhabitants of Fish Creek weren't about to wake up and make their presence known. When Poppy's tongue slipped inside his mouth, tentatively exploring him, Garrett set her back down. He didn't trust himself. He hadn't gotten this worked up over a kiss in more years than he could count. He tried to pull away. She held firm. He reached behind and untwined her arms from his neck. He dropped his forehead to hers. Sweetheart, I've got a feeling I'm going to want to kiss you like that every morning. What he didn't add was, for the rest of my life. The thought came unbidden. He pushed it away far more ruthlessly than he'd nudged her warm body away from his. I think we need to get off the sidewalk and go somewhere and talk. Poppy looked down at the pavement. It took her a moment to collect herself. An image of the sung card she'd pulled earlier flashed through her mind's eye, making her feel rejuvenated, elemental, sensually aware in a way that had her thinking of possibilities and the need to make them real. With Garrett, quickly. Garrett heard her quick intake of air. He felt her hold it for a second before she released it and started the whole process again, all while saying underneath her breath, "You are a strong, independent woman. You can have what you desire." He didn't think he was supposed to hear that, so he smiled inwardly, while outwardly ignoring Poppy's need to center herself after their kiss, a kiss that had rocked his world. The fact that she was shaken as he had been sent a jolt of electricity to his groin and to his ego. "We could go into your house," Poppy said, feigning a neutrality she couldn't quite feel. "Oh, no, we can't. There be dragons hidden there that may devour whatever this is before it has its day in the sun," Garrett thought. Garrett grabbed her hand. He got the feeling Poppy was way out on an emotional limb, and he didn't want her crawling back to safety. He didn't want her to jump off either. If she were going to jump, he wanted to catch her. Always. Every time. Right now, the desire to sink into her, regardless of the consequences, had to play second fiddle to her needs. Poppy wasn't a fling kind of woman. She was a forever kind of woman. Before Garrett jumped into those waters with her, he wanted to make sure she had a lifeboat to find her way back after his inevitable departure from her life. "How about we grab a cup of coffee and maybe some breakfast?" he said, wondering just when it was he decided chivalry was a thing to be valued. Her visible disappointment cheered him a bit. He smiled down at her as he placed a brief, soft kiss on her lips. "Be warned, Poppy Hansen. I am going to take you up on that." Poppy didn't try to misunderstand him. "I fervently hope so," she said, surprising herself by meaning it. Garrett grit his teeth, squeezed her hand tightly, and started off toward the downtown at a clip better suited for jogging. If he didn't get her into the public eye soon, he'd have to visit the dentist. He steered them toward the first breakfast place on their path, breathing a heartfelt sigh of relief as he held the door open for Poppy. He stopped dead in his tracks as the door closed behind him. Absolute mayhem greeted them as they stood just over the threshold into Beth's cupcake shop. And so ends chapter 20. Thank you for spending time with me, and I'll see you tomorrow for chapter 21. Bye.